The fluorescent lights in Building 7 flickered with their usual unreliable rhythm, casting intermittent shadows across the polished linoleum floor. Mary Catherine Thompson pushed her maintenance cart down the empty corridor at 0247 hours, the squeaky wheel echoing through the silence of the Northridge Technology campus. To anyone watching the security cameras, she was just another night shift worker making her rounds invisible, predictable, forgettable, but invisibility had always been Mary's greatest weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She paused outside Laboratory 12, her weathered hands gripping the cart handle as she studied the electronic keypad. Beside the door, the red light blinked steadily, indicating the lab was secured for the night. Through the reinforced glass window, she could see rows of computer workstations and servers humming quietly in the darkness. Northridge Tech's crown jewel, the quantum encryption research facility that supposedly didn't exist. Mary had been cleaning these halls for 3 years, 8 months, and 16 days. Every night, the same routine. Empty trash bins, mop floors, replace burned-out bulbs, and listen. Always listening. The engineers and programmers who worked here during the day saw her as part of the furniture, a middle-aged woman in a gray jumpsuit who spoke only when spoken to and kept her eyes down. They had no idea that those downcast eyes were memorizing security protocols, that her seemingly random cleaning pattern mapped every corner of the facility, or that the woman they called Maintenance Mary had once been Captain Mary K. Thompson, Army Special Operations. That was another life. Another identity buried so deep that sometimes even she almost forgot. The radio clipped to her belt crackled to life. "Thompson, you copy?" Mary keyed the microphone. "Copy, dispatch. Got a maintenance request in Building 3, Conference Room B. Apparently, the HVAC system is making noise again. Think you can take a look? On my way." Mary turned her cart around and headed toward Building 3, her soft-soled work boots making barely a sound on the polished floor. Northridge Technology Campus. Sprawled across 47 acres of prime Silicon Valley real estate, a collection of glass and steel buildings connected by underground tunnels and skywalks. Officially, it was a private research firm specializing in advanced computing solutions. Unofficially, it was a front for some of the most classified military technology development in the United States. Mary knew this because she'd been sent here to watch. 3 years ago, intelligence analysts had identified anomalies in Northridge's research programs, projects that didn't match their public contracts, personnel with classified backgrounds who shouldn't have been working in the private sector. And most concerning, possible security breaches that could compromise national defense systems. The Pentagon needed someone inside, someone who could move freely through the facility without attracting attention. Enter Mary Thompson, whose official military record showed an honorable discharge due to injury. In reality, she'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignment of her career, deep cover infiltration of a facility that might be selling American military secrets to foreign powers. Building 3 housed the administrative offices and conference rooms where Northridge's executives held their most sensitive meetings. Mary had spent months learning the patterns of these meetings, identifying key personnel, and slowly piecing together the true nature of Northridge's operations. What she'd discovered was more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The conference room was on the 3rd floor, accessible only by keycard and biometric scanner. But maintenance personnel had universal access, one of the overlooked vulnerabilities in most security systems. Mary swiped her card and placed her thumb on the scanner, waiting for the soft beep that granted her entry. The room was empty, as expected at this hour, but the air was thick with the lingering smell of expensive cologne and tension. Earlier that evening, she'd observed through security feeds as Jonathan Pierce, Northridge's CEO, had held an emergency meeting with his inner circle. Their body language had suggested a crisis, their hushed conversations ending abruptly whenever anyone else entered the room. Mary set to work on the VAV unit, opening her toolbox and removing what appeared to be standard maintenance equipment. But hidden within the innocuous tools were devices that would have impressed even her former colleagues in special operations: microcameras, audio recording devices, and a sophisticated scanner capable of extracting data from electronic devices within a 30-foot radius. As she worked, her trained ear picked up something the night security guards had missed: the faint hum of electronic equipment coming from the adjoining room. According to the building schematics, that room was supposed to be storage. Mary made a mental note to investigate later. The HVAC repair took exactly 43 minutes, during which time Mary's hidden devices collected terabytes of data from laptops and phones that had been in the conference room earlier. She packed her tools methodically, ensuring everything appeared exactly as it had when she arrived. But as she prepared to leave, she heard something that made her blood freeze: footsteps in the hallway, moving with the measured pace of someone trying not to be heard. Mary had survived 8 years in special operations by trusting her instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming danger. She quickly dimmed the conference room lights and moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the parking lot below. 3 black SUVs sat in the visitor spaces vehicles that hadn't been there when she'd entered the building. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by the low murmur of voices speaking the language she recognized as Mandarin. Mary's pulse quickened as she processed the implications. Foreign operatives here in the middle of the night, moving through a facility that supposedly contained America's most advanced military technology research. This wasn't just about industrial espionage anymore. Mary activated the emergency beacon hidden in her maintenance badge, sending a coded signal to her handlers that would indicate immediate danger. But she knew help wouldn't arrive for hours, and by then it might be too late to prevent whatever was about to happen. The voices were directly outside the conference room now. Mary counted at least 4 distinct speakers, all moving with the disciplined coordination of trained operatives. Through the keyhole, she caught a glimpse of tactical gear and suppressed weapons. This was a military operation, not a simple break-in. Mary's mind raced through her options. She could try to hide and hope they passed by, but if they were here for the same intelligence she'd been collecting, they'd likely search every room systematically. She could attempt to escape through the building's ventilation system, but that would mean abandoning her mission and potentially allowing these operatives to steal critical national security information. Or she could do what she'd been trained to do in special operations: assess the threat, identify the objectives, and neutralize the enemy before they could complete their mission. The decision was made for her when the conference room door handle began to turn. Mary Thompson, maintenance worker extraordinaire, faded away like a discarded uniform. In her place stood Captain Thompson, special operations veteran, as she reached for tools that weren't designed for fixing air conditioners. The door opened silently, and a figure in black tactical gear slipped into the room, weapon raised and ready. He was scanning methodically, clearing angles with the precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. But he was looking for threats, not for a middle-aged woman in a maintenance uniform who'd pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Mary moved with the fluid grace that 8 years of close-quarters combat training had burned into her muscle memory. Her left hand closed over the intruder's mouth while her right arm snaked around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid arteries with surgical precision. He struggled for exactly 7 seconds before going limp. Mary lowered him to the floor carefully, ensuring his equipment made no noise. She quickly stripped him of his weapons, a suppressed 9mm pistol and what appeared to be a military-grade communication device. The radio was already chattering with urgent voices speaking Mandarin, but Mary's understanding of the language was sufficient to catch key phrases: Building 3 secure, Proceeding to target location, and most concerning, eliminate all witnesses. This was no longer a covert intelligence gathering operation. These operatives were here to steal whatever they could find and kill anyone who might identify them afterward. Mary checked the unconscious operative's pockets, finding identification that confirmed her worst fears. Chinese Ministry of State. Security credentials. This wasn't industrial espionage. It was state-sponsored warfare conducted in the shadows of Silicon Valley. The radio crackled again, this time with a voice speaking accented English. Alpha Team, report status. Mary keyed the microphone, modulating her voice to match the operative she'd just neutralized. Building 3 clear. Moving to a secondary objective. Copy, Alpha. Bravo Team is in position at the server room. Charlie Team securing perimeter exits. You have 15 minutes to complete data extraction. 15 minutes. Mary now had a timeline and confirmation that multiple teams were operating throughout the facility. Her emergency beacon had been activated, but federal response teams were at least 30 minutes away. In 15 minutes, these operatives would have copied Northridge's entire research database and disappeared into the night, taking with them technology that could compromise every American. Military operation for the next decade. Mary quickly disabled the unconscious operative's communication device and secured his weapons. She needed to move fast, but she also needed information. The radio chatter had mentioned a server room, which could only be the quantum encryption lab in Building 7, the same lab she'd been observing for months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she prepared to leave the conference room, Mary caught sight of herself in the darkened window's reflection. For 3 years, she'd hidden behind the persona of a harmless maintenance worker, invisible and underestimated. But tonight, the shadows of her past had caught up with the carefully constructed present. Mary Thompson, maintenance worker, would have called security and hidden in a supply closet. Captain Thompson, special operations veteran, was going to war. She slipped out of the conference room and into the hallway, moving with the silent precision that had once made her one of the Army's most effective close-quarters combatants. The building's layout was burned into her memory from months of nightly cleaning rounds, every corner and stairwell mapped with military precision. The emergency stairwell provided the fastest route to Building 7, but Mary knew the operatives would have sentries posted at key choke points. She needed a different approach, one that only someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's maintenance systems would know. The service tunnels, Northridge's underground maintenance network, connected all 7 buildings, designed to allow utility workers to move between structures without disrupting normal operations. Mary had spent countless hours in these tunnels, supposedly checking electrical systems and water pipes, but actually memorizing every inch of the facility's hidden infrastructure. She accessed the tunnel system through a maintenance hatch near the building's central elevator bank. The tunnels were dark, humid, and filled with the constant hum of electrical equipment, but they were also unmonitored by security cameras and unknown to anyone without maintenance clearance. As Mary made her way through the narrow concrete passageways, she could hear muffled voices and footsteps from the buildings above. The Chinese operatives were moving with military efficiency, but they were operating in unfamiliar territory while she was navigating her own backyard. The tunnel beneath Building 7 connected to a utility room directly adjacent to the quantum encryption lab. Mary emerged from the maintenance hatch like a ghost materializing from shadows, immediately assessing her surroundings for threats and opportunities. Through the utility room's ventilation grate, she could hear voices speaking Mandarin and the electronic whine of high-speed data extraction equipment. The operatives were already in the lab, copying research that represented years of classified development work. Mary checked her appropriated weapons, one suppressed pistol with a full magazine, plus 2 spare magazines from the unconscious operative. Not ideal for engaging multiple hostiles, but she'd worked with less in Afghanistan and Somalia. More importantly, she knew something the Chinese operatives didn't. The quantum encryption lab had a security feature that wasn't documented in any official building plans. During her months of observation, Mary had discovered that Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lab's lead researcher, had installed an emergency data purge system that could completely wipe the servers if activated from a hidden terminal in the utility room. Terminal was concealed behind a false electrical panel, installed by Dr. Chen as a last resort against exactly this type of security breach. Mary had watched the researcher test the system during late-night sessions, when she thought no one was observing. But activating the purge system would destroy not only the stolen data, but also months of legitimate research, potentially setting back American quantum encryption development by years. It was the kind of decision that required weighing immediate tactical needs against long-term strategic consequences, exactly the type of impossible choice that had defined Mary's military career. The voices in the lab grew more urgent, and Mary could hear the distinctive sound of portable hard drives being connected to the main servers. Time was running out. Mary made her choice. She opened the hidden panel and began inputting the activation sequence for the data purge system, her fingers moving with practiced precision across the concealed keyboard. The system required a 60-second countdown before activation, 60 seconds during which the Chinese operatives would realize their mission was compromised and likely respond with lethal force. As the countdown timer appeared on the hidden display, Mary heard new voices in the lab, American voices, raised in protest and fear. The night security guards had stumbled into the operation, and from the sound of the conversation, they were about to become casualties. Mary's training had prepared her for many scenarios, but this wasn't just about protecting classified information anymore. American lives were at stake, and she was the only person in position to act. Captain Mary Thompson checked her weapon one final time and prepared to step out of the shadows that had concealed her for 3 years. The maintenance worker disguise had served its purpose, but now it was time to remind everyone why special operations veterans never truly retire. They just wait for the moment when their country needs them most. The countdown timer read 53 seconds when Mary heard the first gunshot. The sound echoed through the ventilation system like a thunderclap, followed immediately by shouting in both English and Mandarin. Through the utility room's thin walls, she could distinguish at least 3 distinct voices, 2 Chinese operatives barking orders, and 1 American security guard pleading for his life. 40-9 seconds. Mary positioned herself beside the utility room door, weapon ready. The lab's main entrance was 20 feet down the corridor, but there was a service entrance directly adjacent to her position, a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that the security guards wouldn't have known about. "Please, I have a family," came the desperate voice of Walter Hendricks, the senior night security supervisor. Mary had spoken with him hundreds of times during her maintenance rounds. He was 62 years old, a grandfather who collected model trains and brought homemade cookies for the cleaning staff every Christmas. 42 seconds. A second gunshot rang out, followed by silence. Mary's jaw clenched as rage flooded through her system, not the wild, unfocused anger of a civilian, but the cold, calculated fury of a professional warrior who just witnessed the murder of an innocent person. In special operations, they'd called it operational clarity, the moment when all emotion crystallized into pure tactical focus. Through the service door's reinforced glass window, she could see into the quantum encryption lab. 4 Chinese operatives in tactical gear were positioned around the room's main workstation, where portable storage devices were connected to the primary research servers. A 5th operative stood guard near the main entrance, his weapon trained on the hallway. 2 bodies lay motionless near the lab's entrance. Walter Hendricks and his partner, James Morrison, Both executed for the crime of doing their jobs. 36 seconds. The lead operative was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with teams in other buildings. Mary's limited Mandarin allowed her to catch fragments. Package secure. American resistance neutralized. Extraction in 10 minutes. They thought they'd eliminated the only threat. They were about to learn otherwise. Mary studied the lab's layout through the service door window. The room was approximately 30 feet square, filled with server racks, computer workstations, and quantum processing equipment worth millions of dollars. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the space, creating natural concealment opportunities. Operative near the main entrance was her first priority. He had line of sight to the corridor and could call for backup. The 4 operatives around the central workstation were focused on their data extraction, their backs turned to the service entrance. Mary's special operations training had emphasized the psychological impact of sudden, overwhelming violence. In close quarters combat, the side that acted first and most decisively usually won, regardless of numerical disadvantage. 20-8 seconds. Mary checked her suppressed pistol one final time, ensuring the safety was off and a round was chambered. Through years of combat experience, she'd learned to control her breathing and heart rate even in the most stressful situations. Her pulse was steady, her hands rock solid. She opened the service door with mechanical precision, moving into the lab like a shadow given deadly purpose. The first operative died without knowing he was under attack. Mary's suppressed weapon coughed twice, placing both rounds center mass with surgical accuracy. He collapsed beside the server rack, his own weapon clattering across the polished floor. The sound of falling equipment alerted the other operatives, but by then Mary was already moving to her next position. Combat in confined spaces was about angles, timing, and exploiting the split-second confusion that followed unexpected contact. 21 seconds. Contact, shouted one of the operatives in Mandarin, spinning toward the source of the disturbance. But Mary had anticipated this reaction, positioning herself behind a bank of quantum processors that provided both concealment and armor. Protection. The lab erupted in automatic weapons fire as the remaining operatives opened up with their assault rifles. Bullets sparked off metal surfaces and shattered computer monitors. But Mary was already gone, having rolled to a new position behind the main server bank. The operatives were using standard room-clearing tactics, but they were fighting an opponent who knew the terrain better than they did and who'd spent 3 years memorizing every piece of equipment, every shadow, every potential advantage the space offered. 15 seconds. Mary emerged from behind the servers like a wraith, her suppressed pistol speaking in rapid measured bursts. The second operative took 3 rounds to the chest before he could bring his rifle to bear. The third operative managed to return fire, but his shots went wide as Mary dropped into a combat crouch behind a workstation. "Where is she?" screamed the lead operative in accented English. "Find her." But she was already moving again, using the lab's complex layout to her advantage. Years of cleaning this room had taught her exactly where each piece of equipment was positioned, which corners provided concealment, and how to move through the space without silhouetting herself against the emergency lighting. 9 seconds. Remaining 2 operatives were fighting blind now, firing at shadows and struggling to coordinate their movements in the chaos. Mary had seized the initiative and refused to give it up, pressing her attack with the relentless precision that had made her Special Operations Unit one of the most effective in the military. She flanked the 4th operative as he reloaded, putting 2 rounds into his center mass before he could chamber a fresh magazine. The suppressed shots were barely audible over the ringing of emergency alarms that had finally activated throughout the building. 3 seconds. The lead operative was alone, now barricaded behind the central workstation where the data extraction equipment was still running. He was shouting into his radio, calling for immediate backup and extraction, but Mary could hear the fear in his voice. He'd come here expecting to face civilian security guards and unarmed researchers, not a ghost from America's shadow wars. 1 second. The data purge system activated with a soft electronic hum, immediately beginning the process of wiping every server in the lab. Years of quantum encryption research started disappearing into digital oblivion, taking with it both American military secrets and the intelligence the Chinese operatives had come to steal. The lead operative screamed in frustration as his mission dissolved before his eyes. His portable storage devices showed massive data corruption as the purge system methodically destroyed everything it could reach. "You have lost," Mary called out in Mandarin, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Your mission is over. Surrender now and you will live." The response came in the form of automatic weapons fire as the operative emptied his magazine in her general direction. But desperation made for poor marksmanship, and Mary had already moved to a position where she could see his muzzle flashes. While remaining concealed herself, she waited for the telltale click of an empty chamber, then moved with the fluid grace of a predator closing on wounded prey. The operative was fumbling for a fresh magazine when Mary's suppressed pistol found him, ending his mission and his life with 2 precisely placed shots. Silence fell over the quantum encryption lab like a heavy blanket. Emergency lighting continued to flash, casting intermittent shadows across the bodies of 5 Chinese operatives who would never report back to Beijing. The data extraction equipment continued to hum uselessly, trying to copy information that no longer existed. Mary stood among the wreckage of the covert operation, her maintenance worker uniform splattered with blood and cordite residue. Around her, millions of dollars in quantum processing equipment sparked and smoked from bullet damage. The purge system continued its work, ensuring that even if other operatives had accessed the network remotely, they would find nothing but corrupted data. But Mary's mission wasn't over. The radio chatter she'd intercepted earlier had mentioned multiple teams operating throughout the facility. Bravo team was still active somewhere in the building complex, and Charlie team was securing perimeter exits to prevent anyone from escaping. More concerning, her own backup was still 20 minutes away, and she could already hear boots pounding up the emergency stairwells. The gunfire and alarms had alerted every hostile in the facility to her position. Mary quickly searched the dead operatives, collecting weapons, ammunition, and communication equipment. She now had 3 assault rifles, multiple magazines, and tactical gear that would be essential for the running battle that was about to begin. The lead operative's radio crackled with urgent voices speaking Mandarin. "Alpha Team, report status immediately. We have contact with American security forces." Mary keyed the microphone, speaking in fluent Mandarin with the dead operative's inflection. "Alpha Team engaged. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate extraction." "Copy, Alpha. Bravo Team is moving to assist. Hold your position." Mary smiled grimly as she shouldered one of the assault rifles. Let them come. She'd spent 3 years learning every inch of this facility, every corridor and stairwell, every maintenance tunnel and emergency exit. The Chinese operatives were operating in hostile territory now, but Mary Townsend was finally home. The maintenance worker disguise lay in tatters around her feet, but the warrior beneath had never been more ready for battle. Through the lab's main window, she could see vehicle headlights racing across the campus parking lot. More operatives were arriving, turning what should have been a simple intelligence theft into a full-scale military engagement. Mary checked her ammunition and activated the communication device she'd taken from the first operative. Time to even the odds and remind everyone that some Americans never stop fighting for their country, no matter what uniform they're wearing. Mary moved through the smoke-filled corridor like a specter, her appropriated assault rifle held in a low-ready position as she navigated the maze of emergency lighting and fire suppression systems that had activated throughout Building 7. The Chinese operatives Radio chatter indicated at least 2 more teams were converging on her position. But they were making a critical mistake. They assumed they were hunting a cornered security guard, not stalking a predator who knew every inch of this territory. The service elevator at the end of the corridor provided access to the building's lower levels, where the main electrical systems and backup generators hummed behind reinforced security doors. Mary had spent countless hours in these utility areas during her maintenance cover, ostensibly checking power distribution panels and climate control systems. In reality, she'd been memorizing the facility's critical infrastructure and identifying potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited in exactly this type of situation. As she approached the elevator, Mary heard the distinctive sound of tactical boots on concrete, multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of trained operators. Through the building's public address system, an automated voice repeated the same message: "This facility is in lockdown. All personnel proceed to designated safe areas and await further instructions." The irony wasn't lost on Mary. The safe areas were exactly where the remaining Chinese operatives would look for hostages and witnesses to eliminate. She activated the service elevator with her maintenance keycard, the doors sliding open with a soft chime that seemed unnaturally loud. In the tense silence, as the elevator descended to the basement level, Mary's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The Chinese operation was more sophisticated than typical industrial espionage. The coordination, equipment, and willingness to commit murder suggested state-level backing and military training. The basement corridors were darker than the upper levels, illuminated only by red emergency lighting that cast everything in an ominous crimson glow. Mary moved carefully, her weapon ready and her senses hyper-alert for any indication of hostile presence. The main electrical room was 50 yards ahead, past a series of storage areas and utility closets that could conceal threats or provide defensive positions. Mary's radio crackled with intercepted communications. "Bravo team in position. At Building 5, no sign of the American operative." "Charlie team, what's your status?" "Charlie team securing the administration building. We have 3 civilians detained for questioning." Mary's blood ran cold. The Chinese operatives weren't just stealing intelligence, they were taking hostages. 3 civilians meant the night cleaning crew from Building 3, people Mary had worked alongside for years. Elena Rodriguez, who sent money to her family in El Salvador. David Kim, who was studying engineering at night school. Patricia Williams, a grandmother, working 2 jobs to support her disabled husband. All of them are now facing interrogation and likely execution by foreign operatives on American soil. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. Mary couldn't simply focus on neutralizing the remaining threats. She had to orchestrate a rescue operation while outnumbered and outgunned. She reached the electrical room and quickly accessed the main power distribution panel. 3 years of maintenance work had given her intimate knowledge of the campus power grid, including the redundant systems and manual overrides that could plunge selected buildings into darkness or redirect electrical flow to create controlled blackouts. Mary began methodically shutting down power to specific sections of the facility while maintaining electricity to critical areas. Building 3 went dark first, eliminating the lighting that would give the hostage-takers tactical advantage, while preserving power to the ventilation systems that would keep the civilians alive. Building 5 followed, where the Bravo team was operating, forcing them to rely on portable lighting and thermal imaging equipment. The psychological effect would be immediate. The Chinese operatives would realize they were facing someone with detailed knowledge of the facility's infrastructure, someone who could manipulate their environment like a puppet master, pulling strings in the darkness. Mary's radio buzzed with panicked Chinese voices. "Building 3 is dark." "Repeat, we have lost power in Building 3. Same here in Building 5. Someone is controlling the electrical systems." "This is Dragon Leader. All teams switch to night vision and maintain your objectives." We have one American operative, probably building security. Do not let her disrupt the mission. Dragon Leader. Mary filed the calsign away for future reference. Someone with command authority was coordinating this operation from a remote location, probably in one of the vehicles she'd observed in the parking lot. She left the electrical room and moved toward the tunnel system that connected all 7 buildings. The Chinese operatives would expect her to move through the main corridors and stairwells, but the maintenance tunnels offered concealment and mobility advantages that only someone with her access and knowledge could exploit. The tunnel beneath Building 3 was pitch black, forcing Mary to rely on the infrared scope she'd taken from one of the dead operatives. Through the scope's green-tinted display, she could see the familiar concrete walls and utility pipes that she'd navigated hundreds of times. During routine maintenance calls, as she moved through the tunnel, Mary heard muffled voices from the building above. The Chinese operatives were searching room by room, probably looking for the source of the power failure. She could also hear other voices, frightened and pleading, coming from what sounded like the main conference room where she'd been working just hours earlier. The hostages. Mary reached the access point directly beneath the conference room and paused to listen. Through the ventilation grates, she could hear Elena Rodriguez crying softly while someone spoke to her in broken English. You tell us about the maintenance woman. Where does she work? What does she know about computers? I don't know anything, Elena sobbed. She just cleans the floors. She doesn't talk to anyone. The interrogation was crude but effective. The Chinese operatives were trying to understand whether Mary posed a real threat to their operation or was simply a lucky security guard who'd stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. Mary quietly removed the ventilation grate and peered into the conference room above. 3 figures in tactical gear stood around Elena, David, and Patricia, who were bound to chairs with zip ties. One operative held an assault rifle while the other 2 conducted the interrogation with a combination of threats and physical intimidation. Room's layout was burned into Mary's memory from months of cleaning it. Large conference table in the center, presentation equipment along one wall, and most importantly, a dropped ceiling with removable tiles that provided access to the space above. Mary holstered her weapon and began climbing through the ventilation shaft toward the conference room's ceiling access point. The metal ductwork creaked softly under her weight, but the sound was masked by the air handling systems that were still running on emergency power. She positioned herself directly above the conference room and carefully lifted one of the ceiling tiles, creating a small opening that allowed her to observe the scene below. The 3 operatives were focused on their prisoners, their weapons lowered as they concentrated on the interrogation. Elena was answering their questions with the honesty of someone who genuinely knew nothing about Mary's true identity. She's been here for years, very quiet, very polite. She doesn't speak much English. That last lie brought a slight smile to Mary's face. Elena was protecting her in the only way she knew how, providing misdirection that might buy precious time. But time was running out. Through her appropriated radio, Mary could hear Dragon Leader coordinating with teams throughout the facility. They were planning to extract in 15 minutes, which meant the hostages would likely be eliminated as soon as the interrogation was complete. Mary drew her suppressed pistol and aimed through the ceiling opening. The angle was challenging, and she'd only get one chance before the remaining operatives returned fire into the ceiling. She needed to neutralize all 3 threats simultaneously, which meant making her shots count with mathematical precision. First operative was positioned directly below her, an easy target. The second was to her left, requiring a slight adjustment. The third was partially concealed behind David Kim's chair, presenting only a partial target. Mary controlled her breathing and began her trigger sequence. The suppressed weapon coughed 3 times in rapid succession, and all 3 operatives collapsed before they could raise their weapons or call for help. She dropped through the ceiling opening into the conference room, landing in a combat crouch with her weapon ready. The three civilians stared at her in shock, unable to reconcile the soft-spoken maintenance worker they knew with the deadly operative who just materialized from above. "Elena, are you hurt?" Mary asked in Spanish, quickly moving to cut their restraints with a tactical knife. "Mary, how did you? What are you?" Elena's voice trailed off as she took in Mary's tactical gear and the bodies of the Chinese operatives. "I'll explain later," Mary replied, freeing David and Patricia in turn. "Right now we need to get you somewhere safe. There are more of them in the building." David Kim found his voice first. "Mary, you're not really a maintenance worker, are you?" Mary met his gaze steadily. "I'm exactly who I've always been. Someone who protects innocent people." She quickly searched the dead operatives, finding additional weapons and communication equipment. The radio chatter indicated that Dragon Leader was growing impatient with the lack of progress from his teams. "Listen carefully," Mary told the three civilians. "I'm going to get you out of here, but you need to follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that?" All three nodded, their fear now mixed with a growing trust in someone they'd never really known, but who just risked her life to save them. Mary led them toward the emergency exit, but as they reached the stairwell, her radio exploded with urgent Chinese voices. "Charlie team is not responding." "Repeat, Charlie's team is not responding." "Bravo team, converge on Building 3 immediately. The American has neutralized Charlie's team." Mary looked at Elena, David, and Patricia, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. The maintenance worker they'd known for years was gone, replaced by someone they were only beginning to understand. "Change of plans," Mary said grimly. "We're not running anymore." The emergency stairwell of Building 3 had become a tactical bottleneck, and Mary knew it. Through the reinforced glass windows, she could see muzzle flashes in the parking lot as Bravo team moved toward their position with military precision. The sound of boots on concrete echoed from multiple directions. They were being surrounded. Elena Rodriguez gripped Mary's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "What do we do? How many of them are there?" Mary checked her weapons and ammunition while mentally calculating their options. 6 operatives remaining, plus their command element. They have superior firepower and numbers, but they're operating in my territory now. David Kim peered through the stairwell window, his engineering background helping him assess the tactical situation. "Mary, those aren't just thieves, are they? This is something bigger." "State-sponsored intelligence operation," Mary confirmed, her voice carrying the clinical tone of someone briefing a military unit. "Chinese Ministry of State Security, here to steal quantum encryption research that could compromise American military communications for the next decade." Patricia Williams, despite being in her 60s, showed remarkable composure under pressure. "What can we do to help?" Mary looked at the 3 civilians people she'd shared countless quiet conversations with during late-night cleaning shifts, whose personal struggles and triumphs she'd listened to with the patience of someone who understood the value of human connection. Now they were looking to her not as maintenance Mary, but as someone who could guide them through a nightmare they'd never imagined. "You can stay alive," Mary said simply. "That's the most important thing right now." The radio crackled with Dragon Leader's voice. "Bravo team, Building 3 is dark, but thermal imaging shows 4 heat signatures in the east stairwell. Converge and eliminate all targets, no survivors." Mary felt the familiar surge of operational clarity that had served her in combat zones across 3 continents. The enemy had made a critical error. They assumed the 4th heat signature was another civilian, not a special operations veteran who just revealed her true capabilities. "Elena, David, Patricia," Mary said, distributing the weapons she'd taken from the dead operatives. "I'm going to teach you something that might save your lives. These are safety switches. Keep them on until I tell you otherwise." If someone comes through that door who isn't me, you point and pull the trigger. Don't think, don't hesitate, just shoot. Elena's hands shook as she accepted the assault rifle. I've never fired a gun before. The weapon will do most of the work. Mary assured her. Your job is to stay calm and trust your instincts. Through the stairwell's upper windows, Mary could see repelling lines being deployed from the building's roof. Bravo team was executing a coordinated assault ground floor breach combined with roof insertion. It was textbook special operations. Tactics, but they were about to learn that textbooks didn't account for defenders who'd written some of those same chapters. Mary moved to the utility closet at the stairwell's midpoint and opened a concealed panel that revealed her contingency. Preparations. Over 3 years of maintenance work, she'd strategically placed emergency supplies throughout the facility, medical kits, communication equipment, and most importantly, explosive charges that could be remotely detonated to seal access points or create diversions. Mary, David whispered urgently, there are people coming down from the roof. Through the upper windows, they could see black-clad figures descending on tactical ropes with professional efficiency. 4 operatives moving in perfect coordination. Their weapons ready and their night vision equipment scanning for targets. Mary activated the first demolition charge, which was positioned in the building's main electrical distribution room 3 floors below. The explosion shook the entire structure, plunging the emergency lighting into intermittent failure and triggering additional fire suppression systems throughout the building. The psychological effect was immediate. The descending operatives paused their descent, unsure whether the explosion represented structural damage or a tactical countermeasure. In that moment of hesitation, Mary struck. She emerged from the utility closet with a rifle-mounted grenade launcher she'd concealed months earlier, anticipating exactly this type of scenario. The high-explosive round detonated against the exterior wall near the rappelling ropes, sending 2 operatives tumbling into the courtyard below while severing the lines that the remaining 2 were using for their descent. The surviving roof. Team members crashed through the stairwell's upper windows in a cascade of broken glass and twisted metal, their coordinated assault reduced to an improvised scramble for survival. Mary was waiting for them. Her first burst caught the lead operative. Center mass before he could orient himself to the new threat environment. The second operative managed to return fire, but his shots went wide as he struggled to maintain balance on the glass-strewn stairwell. Elena screamed as bullets sparked off the concrete walls around them, but she kept her weapon pointed toward the upper stairwell as Mary had instructed. When the second operative tried to advance down the stairs, Elena's rifle spoke in rapid, uncontrolled bursts that forced him to seek cover behind the twisted remains of the window frame. Mary flanked him through the utility area, using her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to approach from an unexpected angle. The operative was focused on the civilians below when Mary's suppressed pistol ended his mission with 2 precisely placed shots. Contact downstairs. Patricia called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. Through the lower stairwell windows, they could see Bravo team's remaining members forcing entry through the building's main entrance. Mary quickly assessed their situation. 2 operatives eliminated on the roof approach, but 4 more were advancing through the ground floor. The civilians were holding their positions admirably, but they lacked the training to engage in sustained combat against professional soldiers. New plan, Mary announced, moving toward the stairwell's central position. I'm going to draw them. Up here. When they come through that door, you shoot everything that moves except me. I'll be coming from the utility area. David's engineering mind was already processing the tactical problem. Mary, this stairwell is a kill zone. If they get established positions on the lower landings, they can suppress us while their backup arrives. Mary smiled grimly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. She activated the second demolition charge, positioned in the building's main structural support column. The explosion was carefully calculated enough to weaken the building's integrity, without causing complete collapse, but sufficient to trigger emergency evacuation protocols that would flood the stairwell. With fire suppression foam and automated safety systems, the effect was immediate and devastating. Emergency klaxons blared throughout the building as foam began pouring from ceiling-mounted dispensers, reducing visibility to mere feet while creating treacherous footing on the stairwell's polished surfaces. Through the chaos, Mary could hear Bravo team's frustrated shouts as their tactical coordination dissolved into confusion. Night vision equipment became useless in the dense foam, and their communication systems were overwhelmed by the building's emergency broadcasts. Mary moved through the foam like a ghost, her knowledge of the stairwell's exact dimensions allowing her to navigate by memory, while the Chinese operative struggled with an environment that had suddenly become alien and hostile. She emerged behind their position, just as they were attempting to establish a firing line toward the upper landing where the civilians waited. The first operative died without seeing his killer, Mary's suppressed weapon, speaking twice in rapid succession. The second operative spun toward the sound, but found only swirling foam and emergency lighting that cast everything in shifting, disorienting shadows. "Where is she?" he shouted in Mandarin to his remaining teammates. "I can't see anything." Mary answered by putting 3 rounds into his center mass, the suppressed shots barely audible over the building's emergency systems. She was already moving again, using the foam and chaos to close with the third operative before he could establish a defensive position. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but when the emergency systems finally cycled down and the foam began to settle, 4 more Chinese operatives lay dead in the stairwell's lower reaches. Mary emerged from the dissipating haze like a specter, her weapon ready but no longer needed. Elena, David, and Patricia stared at her in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the soft-spoken maintenance worker they'd known with the deadly efficient operative who just eliminated an entire assault team. "Is it over?" Elena asked quietly. Mary checked her radio, listening to the panicked communications from Dragon Leader as he realized that both Alpha and Bravo teams had been eliminated. "Not yet. There's still a command element out there, and they're going to be very angry about losing 12 operatives." Through the stairwell windows, they could see additional vehicles arriving in the parking lot. More operatives, possibly a backup team. Or worse, a cleanup crew sent to eliminate all evidence of the operation, including any American witnesses. Mary quickly gathered additional weapons and ammunition from the dead operatives, while her mind raced through possibilities. The federal response team she'd called for were still 10 minutes out, but the arriving Chinese forces wouldn't wait for law enforcement to complicate their extraction. "David," she said, handing him a tactical radio, "you're going to coordinate with federal agents when they arrive. Give them this frequency and tell them you have a federal asset in the field who needs immediate support." "Federal asset?" David repeated, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "Elena, Patricia," Mary continued, "there's a secure room in the basement of Building 1, the facility manager's emergency shelter. David knows where it is from his engineering work. Get there and lock it down until federal agents give you the all-clear." Patricia gripped Mary's arm. "What about you?" Mary checked her weapons and equipment, her expression hardening into the mask of a professional warrior preparing for battle. "I'm going to remind our visitors that attacking Americans on American soil comes with consequences." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mary, who are you really?" Mary met her gaze steadily, seeing in Elena's eyes the same question that had haunted her own reflection for 3 years. "I'm someone who took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't expire just because you change uniforms." She handed Elena a small device that looked like an ordinary maintenance pager. "If something happens to me, give this to the federal agents. It contains everything I've gathered about Northridge's security vulnerabilities, and the Chinese intelligence operation. David's engineering background helped him understand the implications. You've been investigating this place for years, haven't you? This wasn't just about stopping tonight's operation. Northridge technology has been hemorrhaging classified information for months, Mary confirmed. Tonight was supposed to be their final intelligence harvest before shutting down the operation. Instead, it's going to be their last night in business. Through the windows, they could see the backup team moving with military precision toward Building 3. At least 8 operatives, plus the command element that was coordinating from the parking lot. Mary was outnumbered, low on ammunition, and facing enemies who now understood exactly what kind of opposition they were dealing with. But she was also fighting on home ground, with 3 years of preparation and the absolute certainty that failure wasn't an option. Go, she told the 3 civilians. Get to that safe room and stay there until this is over. As Elena, David, and Patricia disappeared into the building's lower levels, Mary Thompson, Maintenance Mary, prepared for the final phase of an operation that had begun 3 years ago with a simple assignment to watch and report. Tonight, she was going to finish it. The backup team moved across the Northridge campus like shadows given form, their tactical discipline evident in every coordinated step. Mary watched from the darkened 3rd floor of Building 3, her appropriated night vision scope tracking 8 operatives as they established a perimeter around the structure. These weren't the same caliber as the team she'd already eliminated there. Equipment was more advanced, their movements more precise, and their coordination spoke of elite military training. Dragon Leader's voice crackled through the radio. Phoenix Team, you are authorized to use any means necessary to eliminate the target and sanitize the operation. No American can leave this facility alive. Mary's jaw tightened as she processed the implications. This wasn't just about covering up a failed intelligence operation anymore. It was about preventing an international incident that could destabilize relations between 2 nuclear powers. The Chinese government couldn't afford to have American authorities discover the scope of their infiltration into Silicon Valley's defense contractors, which meant Mary wasn't just fighting for her own survival, she was fighting to prevent the murder of every American who might have witnessed tonight's operation. Through her scope, she identified the team leader, a tall operative with specialized communication equipment, who was coordinating the assault from behind an armored vehicle. In the parking lot, take out the leader and the team's coordination would suffer. But he was positioned behind hard cover, protected by at least 2 security teams, and well outside the range of her current weapons. Mary needed to get closer, which meant leaving the relative safety of Building 3 and moving through hostile territory, where 8 professional killers were hunting her with thermal imaging, night vision, and sophisticated detection equipment. She activated her final demolition charge, positioned in Building 7's main power transformer. The explosion lit up the night sky like a miniature sun, plunging the entire facility into complete darkness, while simultaneously disabling the backup generators that powered the security systems. The psychological effect was immediate emergency. Lighting failed throughout the campus, leaving only the stars and distant city lights to illuminate the battlefield. The Chinese operatives switched to thermal imaging, but Mary had anticipated this. During her years of maintenance work, she identified the facility's steam distribution system, which carried heated water from the central plant to individual buildings for climate control. Mary accessed the steam system through a maintenance panel in Building 3's utility area, opening valves that would flood the underground tunnels with superheated vapor. Within minutes, the thermal imaging systems that the Chinese operatives relied on would be useless, as the entire campus became a shifting maze of heat, signatures, and thermal confusion. But the steam would take time to build pressure and distribute throughout the system. Until then, she was still operating at a severe disadvantage against an enemy with superior numbers and equipment. Mary gathered her remaining weapons and ammunition, conducting a final inventory that revealed the harsh mathematics of her situation. 3 assault rifles, 2 pistols, approximately 200 rounds of mixed ammunition, and 4 fragmentation grenades taken from the dead operatives. Against 8 elite soldiers with unlimited ammunition and military-grade equipment. The odds were not encouraging. She made her way to the building's emergency exit, pausing to listen for any indication of hostile movement. The Chinese operatives were maintaining radio silence now, communicating through hand signals and tactical discipline that spoke of extensive combat experience. Mary slipped out of Building 3 and moved toward the central courtyard, using the landscaping and architectural features she'd memorized during 3 years of grounds maintenance to conceal her approach. The ornamental fountains and sculptured garden beds that provided aesthetic appeal during the day now offered critical concealment for someone who understood how to use terrain to her advantage. The steam was beginning to work. Through her night vision scope, Mary could see wisps of vapor rising from maintenance grates throughout the campus as the superheated water began flooding the underground utility spaces. Soon, the thermal differential would make accurate thermal imaging impossible. She reached the edge of the parking lot and studied Dragon Leader's position. He was standing behind an armored SUV, his communication equipment connecting him to operational commanders, who were probably coordinating from a ship in international waters or a diplomatic facility that provided legal immunity to security. Operatives flanked his position, their weapons trained on the surrounding buildings while they maintained a defensive perimeter. Getting close enough to eliminate Dragon Leader would require crossing 30 yards of open ground under direct observation by trained killers. But Mary had learned long ago that the most direct approach wasn't always the best approach. She circled around to the campus maintenance building, a structure she knew better than anywhere else on the facility. Inside were the controls for every system that kept Northridge Technology operational: electrical distribution, water pressure, heating and cooling, and most importantly, the fire suppression systems that could be manually activated throughout the entire campus. Mary accessed the main control panel and began systematically activating fire suppression systems in a specific pattern. Building 1 first, then Building 5, then Building 2. To the Chinese operatives, it would appear that fires were breaking out throughout the facility, requiring immediate response to prevent the destruction of the intelligence they'd come to steal. The effect was exactly what Mary had hoped for. Dragon Leader began redeploying his forces to investigate the apparent fires, splitting his team and reducing the security around his command position. But as Mary prepared to move against the now isolated command element, her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood freeze. Dragon Leader, this is Serpent Base. Federal response teams are 5 minutes out. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7. Mary didn't need a translation to understand what that meant: total elimination of all evidence, including any American personnel who might have survived the night's operation. Through her scope, she watched Dragon Leader activate a device that looked like a military communications relay. Within seconds, she could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Not rescue helicopters. Attack helicopters. Mary's mind raced through the implications. The Chinese had positioned air assets offshore, probably launched from a civilian cargo ship that provided cover for military operations. Those helicopters would be armed with rockets and machine guns, capable of reducing the entire Northridge facility to rubble. She had to stop Dragon Leader before he could coordinate the airstrike, but time was running out. Federal response teams approaching from one direction, Chinese attack helicopters from another, and somewhere in the underground tunnels, 3 innocent civilians who were counting on her to keep them alive. Mary sprinted across the parking lot, abandoning stealth for speed as she closed with Dragon Leader's position. His 2 security operatives spotted her immediately, their weapons swinging toward her racing figure. The first operative's shot sparked off. The asphalt around Mary's feet as she dove behind a parked car, rolling and coming up with her assault. Rifle ready. Her return fire was accurate and devastating, 3 rounds center mass that dropped the operative before he could find cover. The second operative was more cautious, using the armored SUV as protection while he maneuvered for a better firing angle. But Mary had spent 3 years studying every vehicle in this parking lot, including the maintenance schedules that revealed which cars had full fuel tanks. Her grenade landed perfectly beneath a sedan with a full gas tank, the explosion creating a fireball that illuminated the entire parking area while sending the security operative diving for cover. In that moment of confusion, Mary closed the distance. Dragon Leader was shouting into his radio, trying to coordinate the incoming airstrike while directing his remaining operatives to Mary's position. But he was multitasking under extreme stress. And stress lead to mistakes. Mary's assault rifle spoke twice, placing both rounds center mass. Dragon Leader collapsed behind the SUV, his radio falling silent as his connection to the offshore command died with him. But the helicopters were still coming, and Mary could hear their rotors growing louder with each passing second. Without Dragon Leader's coordination, they might abort their attack, or they might simply destroy everything to ensure no evidence survived. Mary grabbed Dragon Leader's communication equipment and began studying the control interface. Military radios were standardized across most nations, and her special operations training had included communication protocols for exactly this type of situation. She activated the radio and spoke in Mandarin, using Dragon Leader's voice inflection. As closely as possible, Serpent Base, this is Dragon Leader. Mission accomplished. All American personnel eliminated. Requesting immediate extraction. The response came immediately. Copy, Dragon Leader. Air assets are standing down. Extraction. Team inbound to your location. Mary smiled grimly as she heard the helicopter rotors beginning to fade. The immediate airstrike threat was neutralized, but the extraction team would arrive within minutes to discover that Dragon Leader and his entire operation had been eliminated by a single American operative. She quickly gathered the communication, equipment, and any intelligence materials from Dragon Leader's position, then began moving toward the underground tunnel system where Elena, David, and Patricia were waiting. Federal response teams would arrive soon, but Mary needed to ensure the civilians were safe before she could focus on explaining 3 years of undercover work to authorities, who had no idea she existed. As she disappeared into the maintenance tunnels, Mary could hear sirens in the distance. FBI, CIA, probably military response teams, all converging on a situation that would require careful explanation and delicate diplomatic handling. But for the first time in 3 years, Mary Thompson felt like herself again. Not the invisible maintenance worker who cleaned floors and emptied trash bins, but the special operations veteran who had sworn an oath to defend American interests against all enemies. The extraction team would find nothing but bodies and burning buildings when they arrived. The intelligence operation that had been bleeding American military secrets for months was finished, and the foreign operatives who had murdered innocent security guards were dead. Mary had kept her oath, protected innocent lives, and reminded the world that some Americans would never stop fighting for their country, no matter what uniform they wore or what cover identity they maintained. The war in the shadows was over. But Mary Thompson's real mission was just beginning. The underground tunnel system beneath Building 1 echoed with the distant rumble of federal vehicles converging on the Northridge campus. Mary moved through the familiar concrete passageways, her appropriated tactical gear a stark contrast to the maintenance uniform she'd worn for 3 years. The weight of Dragon Leader's communication equipment and intelligence materials reminded her that tonight's operation had yielded far more than just a defensive victory. She reached the secure room where Elena, David, and Patricia had taken shelter. A reinforced chamber originally designed to protect facility management during natural disasters or terrorist attacks. Mary keyed the entry code, a sequence she'd memorized during her first week of maintenance work when she'd been mapping every emergency protocol in the building. The heavy door swung open to reveal three faces filled with relief and lingering fear. Elena Rodriguez rushed forward, her eyes taking in Mary's battle-worn appearance with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. "Mary, thank God you're alive. We heard explosions, gunfire. We thought." Elena's voice trailed off as she struggled to process the transformation of someone she'd considered a quiet, unassuming colleague. David Kim studied the tactical equipment Mary carried, his engineering mind already analyzing the implications. Those weren't just random criminals, were they? This was something much bigger. Mary set down her weapons and activated a portable jamming device she'd taken from Dragon Leader's position. "Before we talk, we need to ensure this conversation stays private. Federal agents will be here soon, and there are things you need to understand before they start asking questions." Patricia Williams, despite being the oldest of the group, showed remarkable composure. "Mary, or whoever you really are, we've trusted you this far. We're listening." Mary took a deep breath, preparing to reveal truth she'd kept hidden for 3 years. "My name is Mary Catherine Thompson, Captain, United States Army Special Operations Command. For the past 3 years, I've been conducting a deep cover investigation into security breaches at Northridge Technology." The silence that followed was profound. Elena was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a soldier?" "Was a soldier. Now I'm something more complicated." Mary pulled out a secure satellite phone and began entering a classified contact sequence. The maintenance worker identity was cover for investigating the theft of quantum encryption technology that could compromise every American military communication system. David's engineering background helped him grasp the technical implications. Immediately, the quantum lab in Building 7. That's what they were really after. Not just industrial espionage, they were stealing military secrets. Exactly, and tonight's operation wasn't a random break-in. It was the culmination of a 3-year intelligence theft program run by Chinese military intelligence. Mary's satellite phone connected, and she spoke in rapid, coded phrases to someone at a classified government facility. When she finished the call, Patricia asked the question they were all thinking. What happens to us now? We've seen things, military secrets, classified operations. Mary met each of their gazes in turn. You've seen an American intelligence operative protecting classified technology and saving innocent lives. Everything else is compartmentalized above your clearance level. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside indicated that federal response teams had reached the underground level. Mary quickly distributed small communication devices to Elena, David, and Patricia. These will identify you as friendly assets to any federal personnel. When they ask what happened tonight, tell them exactly what you saw. Chinese operatives attacked the facility, took you hostage, and you were rescued by someone who turned out to be more than just a maintenance worker. Elena gripped Mary's arm. Will we see you again? Will we ever know the whole truth? Before Mary could answer, the secure room's intercom activated with a voice speaking in official military terminology. This is FBI Special Agent Sarah Chun. We have federal personnel requesting entry to conduct a briefing of civilian witnesses. Mary activated the door release, and 3 federal agents entered the chamber. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to handling classified situations. Her eyes immediately focused on Mary, taking in the tactical gear and weapons with professional assessment. Captain Thompson, I presume? I'm Special Agent Chun, FBI Counterintelligence Division. We've been monitoring your emergency beacon for the past hour. Mary stood at attention, falling back into military bearing after 3 years of careful disguise. Agent Chun, 3 civilian witnesses all secure. Enemy force eliminated. Intelligence materials recovered. Agent Chun's expression revealed nothing. But her next words carried significant weight. Captain, your cover operation has been classified at the highest levels for 3 years. These civilians have been exposed to information that could compromise ongoing national security operations. Elena, David, and Patricia exchanged worried glances, understanding that they'd become involuntary participants in something far beyond their comprehension. But Mary stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years making life-and-death decisions. Agent Chun, these civilians are heroes. They assisted in the defense of classified materials, helped neutralize foreign operatives, and demonstrated courage under fire. They deserve recognition, not intimidation. Agent Chun studied Mary for a long moment, then turned to the 3 civilians. You've been exposed to classified information tonight, but you've also helped prevent a major security breach. The government has options for how to handle this situation. David's analytical mind was already processing the implications. You're talking about witness protection, aren't you? New identities, relocation, complete separation from our current lives. That's one option, Agent Chun confirmed. The other is a classified consultation agreement that would recognize your contributions while maintaining operational security. Mary felt a surge of protective instinct toward people who'd become more than just cover identities over 3 years of shared work. Agent Chun, these people have families, careers, lives they've built here. They shouldn't be punished for being in the wrong place at the right time. Elena looked between Mary and Agent Chun with growing understanding. What exactly are you proposing? Agent Chun consulted a tablet device. Limited security clearances, regular counterintelligence briefings, and consulting positions with companies that have defense contracts. Essentially, you'd become part of the intelligence community's extended network. Patricia's grandmother instincts kicked in. And if we refuse? If we just want to go back to our normal lives? The silence that followed was answer enough. There was no going back to normal after tonight. But Mary had one more card to play. Agent Chun, I need to speak with you privately about the intelligence materials I recovered from the Chinese command element. The 2 women stepped aside, and Mary activated a privacy shield device that would prevent their conversation from being overheard. What she revealed in the next 5 minutes would reshape Agent Chun's understanding of the Northridge operation and its implications for national security. When they returned to the group, Agent Chun's expression had changed significantly. Based on new information Captain Thompson has provided, this situation has been reclassified. Elena Rodriguez, David Kim, Patricia Williams are being offered positions as classified consultants to the Department of Defense. Elena's eyes widened. What does that mean exactly? Mary answered before Agent Chun could respond. It means you get to keep your lives, your families, and your identities. You also get to serve your country in ways most people never have the opportunity to do. David's engineering background made him the first to understand the full implications. You're recruiting us, aren't you? Not just as witnesses, but as assets. Agent Chun nodded. Captain Thompson's 3-year operation has revealed vulnerabilities in how we protect classified technology in civilian facilities. We need people with your backgrounds and proven loyalty to help address those vulnerabilities. Patricia Williams, who'd spent her entire life in civilian jobs, asked the most important question. What about Mary? What happens to her now? Mary looked at the 3 people who'd shared her secret life for years without knowing it, feeling a complex mixture of relief and loss. My cover is blown, so the maintenance worker identity ends tonight, but the mission continues. Agent Chun consulted her tablet again. Captain Thompson is being offered a promotion to major and assignment to a new classified program that will extend her work to other facilities across Silicon Valley. Elena gripped Mary's hand. So we'll all be working together again, just differently? Mary smiled for the first time in hours, feeling the weight of 3 years of deception finally lifting from her shoulders. Not exactly together, but on the same team, fighting for the same cause. As federal agents began the complex process of documenting the night's events and transitioning the 4 Americans from victims to assets, Mary reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she entered Northridge Technology as Captain Mary Thompson, Special Operations veteran, disguised as a maintenance worker named Mary. Tonight, she was leaving as Major Mary Thompson, counterintelligence specialist, accompanied by 3 new allies who'd proven their courage when it mattered most. The invisible maintenance worker was gone forever. But the mission she'd started would continue with a team that understood the stakes and was ready to fight for them. 6 months later, Major Mary Thompson stood in the Pentagon briefing room, facing a panel of senior military officers and intelligence officials who represented the highest levels of American national security. The stars on her shoulders felt both familiar and foreign, a return to her military identity after 3 years of carefully maintained invisibility. Major Thompson, began General Patricia Blackwood, Director of Defense Intelligence, your operation at Northridge Technology has yielded intelligence that has fundamentally changed how we approach security in the private defense sector. Mary remained at attention, but her mind drifted momentarily to the events that had brought her to this moment. The burned-out remains of Northridge Technology had been quietly demolished and replaced with a memorial park. Officially, a gas leak explosion had claimed the lives of several security guards and destroyed the facility. Unofficially, the quantum encryption research had been relocated to a military installation, where foreign intelligence services would never again have access. The Chinese intelligence network you uncovered, continued Admiral James Harrison, extended to 17 different technology companies across Silicon Valley. Your 3-year investigation provided the foundation for Operation Digital Shield, the largest counterintelligence sweep in American history. The recognition felt surreal to someone who'd spent years being invisible, overlooked, and underestimated. But Mary had learned that the most important victories often happened in the shadows, witnessed only by those who understood the true cost of freedom. General Blackwood consulted her briefing materials. The civilians who assisted in your operation, Rodriguez, Kim, and Williams, have all completed their security clearances and begun work as classified consultants. Their insights into facility vulnerabilities from a civilian perspective have been invaluable. Mary allowed herself a small smile. Elena Rodriguez now worked as a security consultant, using her years of cleaning experience to identify weaknesses that engineers and military personnel overlooked. David Kim had joined a classified engineering program that hardened civilian facilities against intelligence penetration. Patricia Williams had become a trainer, teaching other civilians how to recognize and respond to foreign intelligence operations. They were no longer invisible either. Major Thompson, said Director Harrison, you've proven that sometimes the most effective intelligence operations require patience, dedication, and the willingness to sacrifice personal recognition for national security. Your actions at Northridge prevented the compromise of quantum encryption technology that protects every American military communication system. The briefing room's large screen activated, displaying a map of the United States with dozens of red markers scattered across major technology centers. Each marker represented a facility where foreign intelligence services had attempted or succeeded in penetrating American defense research. Which brings us to your next assignment, General Blackwood announced. Operation Guardian Angel, a nationwide program to embed deep cover operatives in critical technology companies. You'll be training and supervising a network of intelligence professionals who will spend years maintaining civilian cover identities while protecting America's most sensitive research. Mary studied the map, understanding the scope of what was being proposed. Dozens of operatives, each spending years in deep cover, each sacrificing their military identities to become invisible guardians of American technological superiority. "General," Mary said, "how many operatives are we talking about?" 47 initial placements, with expansion plan based on threat assessment. Maintenance workers, security guards, administrative assistants, janitors, all the invisible people who have access to everything but are noticed by no one. The irony wasn't lost on Mary. She'd spent 3 years proving that the invisible members of society could be the most powerful protectors of national security. Now that lesson was being scaled up to defend an entire nation's technological edge. Admiral Harrison leaned forward. "Major, you'll be based at Fort Meade, with a staff of 12 intelligence professionals and unlimited resources to develop cover identities, insertion protocols, and communication systems. You'll essentially be creating an army of invisible soldiers." Mary thought about Elena, David, and Patricia, ordinary people who'd shown extraordinary courage when their country needed them. The network she was being asked to build would identify and recruit similar individuals, people who understood that true patriotism sometimes meant being forgotten by history. "I accept the assignment," Mary said without hesitation. General Blackwood stood, signaling the end of the formal briefing. "Major Thompson, one final matter. The Presidential Unit citation for your actions at Northridge, it will remain classified. For obvious reasons. But the President wanted you to know that your service has been noted at the highest levels of government." As the senior officers filed out of the briefing room, Mary remained behind, studying the map of potential insertion sites. Each red marker represented American researchers, engineers, and scientists who had no idea they were targets of foreign intelligence services. Each marker was also a place where someone like Mary could make a difference. Her secure phone buzzed. With a text message from Elena Rodriguez, "New assignment going well. Found 3 security vulnerabilities on my first day. Some things never change." Mary smiled, understanding that Elena had found her true calling in protecting the country. That had given her family opportunities they'd never had in El Salvador. Service took many forms, but the underlying commitment remained the same. Another message arrived. This one from David Kim. "Engineering briefing tomorrow on quantum-resistant communication protocols. Finally using my degree for something that matters." The third message came from Patricia Williams. "Training class graduated yesterday. 12 new civilian assets ready for deployment. Your training protocols are working." Mary felt a deep sense of satisfaction reading these updates. The team that had formed during one desperate night had evolved into something larger and more important, a proof of concept that ordinary Americans could become extraordinary guardians of national security. As she prepared to leave the Pentagon and begin her new assignment, Mary reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she'd been Captain Mary Thompson, Special Operations veteran, tasked with a simple surveillance mission. Tonight, she was Major Mary Thompson, architect of a new kind of warfare, one fought not with conventional weapons, but with patience, dedication, and the power of being underestimated. The maintenance worker identity was gone forever. But the lessons learned during those 3 years of invisibility would shape how America defended itself in an age where the most dangerous enemies wore business suits and carried laptops instead of uniforms and rifles. 6 months after the Northridge operation, Mary Thompson walked out of the Pentagon and into the Virginia evening, no longer invisible but finally visible for all the right reasons. She had a network to build, operatives to train, and a country to protect. They had called her Maintenance Mary until she revealed that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones everyone overlooks. In the shadows of America's technology centers, a new generation of invisible guardians was about to begin their watch. And Major Mary Thompson would be there to guide them, teaching them that true strength comes not from being seen, but from seeing everything while remaining unseen. The war for America's technological future would be fought by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged, and whose victories would be measured not in territory captured, but in secrets protected. Mary Thompson had proven that invisible didn't mean powerless. Now she was going to teach an entire generation of Americans how to disappear in plain sight and emerge as their country's greatest defenders. The maintenance worker was gone. The Guardian had arrived, and America's enemies would never see her. Coming up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.